3 days before my company's 25th anniversary gala, I walked into a tailor shop on Yorkville Avenue to collect the silk blouse and blazer I would wear as the woman who had built Donovan Strategic Consulting from a spare bedroom in North York into a firm with 43 employees and $9 million in annual revenue. I was not thinking about the speech I had written. I was not thinking about the documents my son had asked me to sign at the end of the evening. I was thinking about whether I had time to stop at the Tim Hortons on Bloor before heading back to the office. Helen Cho met me at the door before the bell had finished ringing. She was 61, Korean-Canadian, the kind of woman who had pressed the lapels of half of Rosedale for 30 years and never once gossiped about the families inside those houses. She had altered my blazers since 1999. I trusted her the way you trust someone whose hands have been careful with the things that matter to you. Her face was wrong. Not frightened exactly, careful. The way a person looks when they are holding something fragile and do not want to drop it. "Mrs. Donovan," she said quietly. "Are you alone?" I told her I was. She turned the deadbolt on the front door without another word. She took me to the back of the shop, past the pressing forms and the rack of garments waiting to be claimed, to a narrow storage room where she kept her bolts of extra fabric. She pulled the door almost shut and turned off the overhead light. A thin line of yellow came in under the door from the shop. "Last Tuesday," she whispered, "your son was here. He came with another man I have not seen before. Tall, dark coat, glasses. That was Ryan Cole. My son James had brought his business partner to my tailor shop. They waited for me to go to the back," Helen said. "They didn't know I could hear through that wall." She pressed one hand flat against the plaster beside us. I held my breath. She told me what she had heard. The competency assessment was already written. Dr. Patricia Holt had prepared it the week prior. 4 documented incidents of cognitive decline over the past 5 months. Once it was filed with James's lawyer on Monday morning, the power of attorney amendment would activate automatically. Everything held in my name, the company shares, the RRSP accounts Robert and I had built over 30 years, the family trust we had established when James was 7, would transfer to James as sole beneficiary and acting officer. Management authority over Donovan Strategic would pass to Ryan Cole as appointed executive director. Ryan had debts. Helen had not known that part, but she had heard him say, "Once the transfer clears, we move the receivables into the numbered company before anyone on the board thinks to look." I stood in the dark of that storage room and felt the floor become very far away. Then I thought about James, my son, the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder on the drive home from his hockey games in Scarborough, the man who had delivered the eulogy at his father's funeral 11 years ago without once looking at the paper in his hand because he had memorized every word. The 37-year-old who had sat across from me at the boardroom table every Tuesday morning for the past 6 years and called me by my first name in front of the staff because that was the professional thing to do. I asked Helen if she was certain about what she had heard. She looked at me steadily. "I have been listening to conversations through that wall for 30 years, Mrs. Donovan. I am certain." I thanked her. I picked up my blazer and my silk blouse in their garment bag. I walked out onto Yorkville Avenue and the September afternoon was sunny and cool and everyone on the sidewalk looked ordinary, and I stood there for a moment with my hand against the brick of the building because my legs had gone unreliable. Then I got into my car and I sat there. The gala was on Saturday. 3 days. Robert had died 11 years ago of a sudden cardiac event at 62. He was a civil engineer, honest and quiet. The kind of man who remembered the names of waitstaff and always shoveled the neighbors' driveways before they woke up. When he died, James had been 26, already articled at a Bay Street firm. I had been 53, and I had made a decision that I would not let the company falter, because the company was the thing Robert and I had built together in the years when James was small and money was tight, and we had believed, both of us, that the work mattered. I had rebuilt. I had grown. I had promoted James to VP of Operations in 2018 because he was brilliant and because I thought, with everything I had, that I could trust him. I sat in my car on Yorkville Avenue and I thought about all of it. Then I started the engine. Because I had 62 hours. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we go further, I'd love to know where in Canada are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. These stories travel further than I ever expect. The first call I made was to Diane Okafor. Diane had been my corporate lawyer for 16 years. Her firm was on Adelaide Street in the financial district. When I told her I needed an emergency meeting that evening and that she should not mention it to anyone in my office, she said, "I'll be here until 9. I did not go home first. I drove directly to Adelaide Street. Diane listened without interrupting. She asked to see the garment bag. I did not have documents. I had only Helen's account and my own churning certainty. Diane leaned back in her chair. "Tell me about the power of attorney document," she said. "The one James asked you to sign at the gala." James had framed it as a succession plan, a formality, he had said, standard governance for a company reaching its 25th year. The document outlined a transition of voting rights from me to him in the event of my incapacity, alongside a restructuring of the family trust. "Have you read the full document?" Diane asked. I had skimmed it. James had sent it over 2 weeks ago. I had meant to read it carefully over the weekend. I had not. Diane pulled up her email. I had forwarded her the document in 2021 as part of a general records update. She found it in 4 minutes. She read for a long time. Then she turned the monitor so I could see. Section 8.2. Emergency Governance Provision. In the event that the founding officer is assessed as cognitively impaired by a licensed physician and a second confirming practitioner, all voting rights, share authority, and fiduciary control over the Donovan Family Trust and all associated business entities transfer immediately and irrevocably to the named successor. The named successor was James. The confirming practitioner listed was Dr. Patricia Holt, a psychiatrist in North York with privileges at Sunnybrook. "If she files Monday and James files Tuesday," Diane said quietly, "you could lose controlling interest in your own company by Wednesday afternoon." "I know. Can we stop it?" "Emergency injunction through Ontario Superior Court. We can freeze the transfer, but we need evidence of fraud, not just intention." She paused. "Margaret, if this is what it appears to be, James has committed a serious breach of fiduciary duty. We need to know the full scope before Saturday night." She pulled a business card from her drawer. "Call this man tonight. His name is Victor Arsenault, retired OPP. He works financial investigations privately now. I've used him twice." I took the card. She walked me to the elevator. "One more thing," she said. "If Ryan Cole is moving receivables into a numbered company, there's already a trail. There are always trails. Victor will find it." I said thank you. She said, "Robert would be furious." "I know," I said, "so am I." Victor Arsenault met me at a diner on Kingston Road at 8:30 that night. He was 65, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had spent decades in rooms where people lied to him and had developed a very particular tolerance for it. He ordered coffee black. He brought a yellow legal pad. No phone, no laptop. He wrote in a compressed, angular hand. I told him everything. Helen's account. Section 8.2. Ryan Cole. The numbered company. The file on Dr. Holt. He did not interrupt once. When I finished, he turned back 2 pages in his notepad and read something. "Donovan Strategic," he said. "Your husband started it?" "We started it together. He handled the engineering contracts. I handled the client side. Robert Donovan." He was quiet for a moment. I knew him. I stared. 1994. I was working a fraud case involving a highway construction bid in Durham region. The contractor had been rigging tenders for 5 years. Nobody would talk. "Your husband found me through a mutual contact. He brought me 3 sets of documents he had received from a subcontractor who was afraid to come forward himself." Victor set down his pen. "He didn't have to do that. It had nothing to do with his firm. He said it was the right thing." My throat tightened. That was exactly what Robert would have said. "I never got the chance to tell him properly what that meant," Victor said. The case resulted in 4 convictions and an overhaul of provincial tender law. He picked up his pen. "Tell me what you need, and tell me how much time we have." 60 hours, I said. He nodded. "I'll need access to your company's financial records through someone you trust internally. I'll need Ryan Cole's professional background. I'll need everything you have on Dr. Patricia Holt." My senior accountant, Beverly Park, no relation to Helen. She had been with the firm since 2009. James did not like her, which I had always found reassuring. "Call her tonight," Victor said. "Tell her to pull Ryan's access logs and any outgoing transfers in the last 8 months. Tell her to say nothing to James." Then he closed his notepad and stood. "3 things," he said, putting on his coat. "Each one is going to be worse than the last." "Tell me." "Not yet. I want to be sure first." He dropped a 20 on the table. "Go home. Rest. I'll call you at 6 tomorrow morning." I drove home to the house on Hillcrest Avenue that Robert and I had bought in 2001 when James started middle school. I parked in the driveway and sat looking at the kitchen light I had left on. Our neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the street. Everything was ordinary. I went inside and I did not sleep. At 5:47 the morning my phone buzzed. Victor. Found the numbered company. 1247839 Ontario Limited. Registered April of this year. Cole is listed as sole director. 3 client payments that should have gone to Donovan Strategic were redirected to this account between June and August. Total diverted. $240,000. It goes deeper. Come to my office at noon. Bring Diane. I sat up and stared at the gray light coming through the curtains. $240,000. That was only what he had found in 9 hours. Victor Arsenault's office was in a building on Danforth. Diane arrived before me. Beverly Park was already there, her face tight, a laptop open on the table. Victor had 3 folders. He laid them out in a row, and something about the careful way he arranged them made my stomach turn before he had said a single word. He opened the first one. Ryan Cole had a degree from Schulich. That much was true. The rest of his resume was substantially fabricated. The firm he claimed to have worked at for 8 years in Calgary Meridian Capital Advisors had dissolved in 2016, following regulatory sanctions from the Alberta Securities Commission. Ryan had been one of 3 named parties in the investigation. He had never been formally charged because the primary witness had recanted. Victor placed the ASC summary document on the table. Ryan had gambling debts. He had borrowed against a line of credit at BMO, maxed a second credit card, and taken a private loan in 2022 from a man named Anton Grigor, a loan broker with documented connections to organized lending networks operating out of Mississauga. The loan was $350,000. Interest compounding monthly. Victor laid down a bank statement with transactions highlighted in yellow. Ryan had made 2 partial payments. He had not made another one in 4 months. The second folder. Ryan had been systematically undermining Donovan Strategic for 14 months. Victor placed a chart on the table. 3 client accounts that had departed in the past year. Halliburton Engineering Group. Ryan had provided them with a flawed compliance assessment that had cost them a significant provincial contract. They had blamed our firm and terminated their retainer. Beverly had the billing records $215,000 annually gone. Lakehead Properties. Ryan had deliberately misrepresented the timeline on a deliverable. Their project director had emailed James directly to complain. James had apologized on behalf of the firm and had not told me. Third party, Rideau Agricultural Cooperative. Ryan had shared their financial projections with a competing firm before we had completed our engagement. Beverly had the internal email. Ryan had sent it from his personal account, but he had accessed the file from our server. The timestamp was in the log. Total client damage, approximately $1.4 million over 14 months. He wasn't just stealing, Victor said. He was burning the company down from the inside so it would look like I couldn't manage it, so the decline would look real. Beverly's hands were flat on the table. She said, "I noticed the Halliburton file last spring. I flagged it to James. He told me I was misreading the context." The third folder. Dr. Patricia Holt had done this before. Victor spread 3 printed case summaries across the table. Eleanor Bryce, 74, retired schoolteacher from Oakville. $2.2 million in RRSPs and real estate equity. Her nephew brought Dr. Holt in following a minor car accident in 2019. Holt produced a cognitive assessment concluding moderate dementia. The nephew obtained power of attorney, sold Eleanor's house, liquidated the RRSPs. Eleanor had been in a long-term care facility in Burlington for 3 years. She was not demented. She had been isolated. Her neighbor's daughter, a paralegal in Brampton, had found Eleanor's letters and reported it to the Ontario Seniors Advocate Office. The matter was under review, but the money was gone. Howard Pettigrew, 80. Retired accountant from Kingston, $1.8 million in assets, Holt certified incapacity. His son sold the family property and closed the investment accounts. Howard died in a care facility in 2022, 6 months after his assets transferred. Alice Tran, 69, restaurant owner from Scarborough, $1.1 million. Holt had tried the same process. Alice's daughter worked at a legal clinic on Spadina. She had the documents reviewed. The cognitive assessment had been fabricated. Dates of the testing did not correspond to any appointment recorded at the clinic. The daughter had filed a complaint with the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. It was still pending. Alice Tran was alive. She was willing to speak. I looked at the 3 names. Eleanor Bryce was in a care facility she did not need to be in. Howard Pettigrew was dead. I was going to be the 4th. Victor said Holt received a payment of $55,000 from 1247839 Ontario Limited on August 14th. I have the wire transfer. Diane looked up. That ties Cole directly to the doctor. And James? I asked. Victor was quiet for a moment. James signed 2 of the transfer redirections. His signature is on the Lakehead file. He knew Cole was diverting that client payment. What about the rest of it? The fabricated assessments? Holt? Eleanor Bryce? I don't know yet how much James knew, Victor said. But I know he knew enough. I stood and walked to the window. The street below was ordinary Friday afternoon traffic. A TTC bus pulling away from the stop. A woman with a stroller. 2 men in hard hats drinking coffee from paper cups. $9 million. The family trust. Robert's legacy. My freedom. The company I had spent 25 years building from a bedroom desk and a client list of 6. I turned back to the room. I need all of this ready for tomorrow night, I said. Can you do that? Victor said, already done. Diane said, I filed for the emergency injunction this morning. Judge Teresa Wallace in Ontario Superior Court. She approved it 2 hours ago, sealed until 9 p.m. tomorrow. I looked at them. Beverly. Diane. Victor. When did you do all of that without telling me? You needed sleep, Diane said simply. At 6 in the evening, we gathered in my dining room. Diane, Victor, Beverly, and my oldest friend, Carol Finneran, who had known me since our daughters were in Girl Guides together, and who I had called because I needed one person in the room who had known Robert and knew me before any of this. I told her everything. She held my hand across the table and did not say a word until I finished. Then she said, What do you need from me? Be there tomorrow night, I said. Be in the front row. Victor outlined the sequence. 6 p.m., guests arrive. 7, dinner begins. 8:15, the speeches. 8:30, I give the founder's address. 8:30 to 9, the address becomes something else. 3 phases. Ryan Cole's fraud and debts. Doctor, Holt's history and the fabricated assessments. The document James had asked me to sign. 9 p.m., exactly. The injunction activates. All accounts frozen. Transfer permanently blocked. 9:05. 2 plainclothes OPP officers currently positioned as a catering manager and a guest escort the relevant parties out. George Matthews, in my case, that was Beverly, would stand and confirm the financial evidence independently. Alice Tran would appear by video call. Diane said, One thing, Margaret, if you expose this tomorrow night, James will be publicly implicated. Even if he's not charged, his name will be in the room. I know. Your relationship with your son. I know, I said. The room was quiet. If he was being manipulated, Victor said carefully, he's still your son. The truth protects him from Cole as much as it protects you. He just doesn't know that yet. I looked at Robert's photograph on the sideboard, the one taken in 2007 at the cottage in Muskoka, his hand up against the light off the water. I know what you would say, I thought. I said goodnight to everyone and I went upstairs. I lay on top of the covers, and I stared at the ceiling until 3 in the morning, and then I slept for 2 hours, and then it was Saturday. I dressed carefully. The silk blouse and the blazer, newly pressed, hanging on the closet door. I did my makeup slowly. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. At 9 in the morning, James called. "Mom, I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. 25 years, Dad would have been." He stopped. He would have been really proud. "I'm proud of you too," I said. "I'll see you tonight." After he hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. The gala was at the estates of Sunnybrook. Robert and I had attended a fundraising dinner there in 2003. The grounds were beautiful in autumn. Japanese maples, the Kilberry Road entrance flanked by old stone. 140 guests, clients, employees, board members, people who had been part of building this company, people who had known Robert. I arrived at 5:30 and stood by the entrance and watched people come in. James arrived at 6 with Ryan Cole. Ryan was wearing a dark suit and the kind of confident expression that is not the same thing as innocence. He shook hands with our board chair, Malcolm Strickland. He smiled at Beverly, who smiled back, which cost her something I could see in the set of her jaw. Victor was standing near the bar in a gray blazer. Diane was at table 4 with a folder of documents in her bag. Carol was in the front row of chairs arranged for the speeches. At 7:30, during dinner, James came to find me. He stood beside my chair and bent down. "The documents," he said quietly, "I have them ready for after your speech. It'll just take a few minutes." I smiled at him. "Of course," I said. He squeezed my shoulder and went back to his table. The dinner was excellent. The wine was a Niagara Chardonnay that Robert would have liked. I ate very little. At 8:15, Malcolm Strickland took the microphone and spoke about the history of the firm, the early years, the way Donovan Strategic had grown. He said things about Robert that were accurate and kind. I watched the room and thought about the first time I had written a proposal in the spare bedroom, James asleep down the hall, Robert making tea and bringing it to me without being asked. Then Malcolm said, "And now, the woman who built this company from the ground up, Margaret Donovan." I walked to the podium. The room was warm and full. Candlelit tables, the old stones of the building around us, autumn through the tall windows. People were smiling. I set my written speech on the podium. I did not look at it. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I have been working on something to say for weeks, and I have a speech right here, and I am not going to give it." The room shifted slightly. A few curious looks. "I am going to tell you the truth instead." I looked out at the faces, clients I had served for 15 years, employees who had given their careers to this company, board members who had trusted my judgment. 25 years ago, Robert and I sat at a kitchen table in North York and wrote the name Donovan Strategic Consulting on a piece of paper. We had 3 clients, a second mortgage on our house, and a 6-year-old who thought the fax machine was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. I smiled. The room smiled back. I talked about the early years, the contract we almost lost in 2001, and how Robert stayed up for 48 hours to save it. The 2008 recession, when we chose not to lay off a single employee and borrowed against our retirement savings to make payroll. I watched James's face as I said that. He was listening carefully. I talked about 2013, the year Robert died, the year I stood in Mount Pleasant Cemetery and made a promise to a man who could no longer hear it. I said, "I will not let what we built disappear." The room was very quiet. Rachel, in my case, James was watching me with his father's eyes. Then I stopped smiling. "Marriage," I said, "is built on trust. A company is too." I paused. This week I learned that trust was being used against me. The silence shifted. James's expression changed. I looked toward the back of the room and nodded to Victor at the AV table. The screen behind me lit up. What I am about to share is documented, verified, and has been reviewed by Ontario Superior Court. I want you to hear it from me, because you deserve the truth, and because this company's integrity depends on it. The first document appeared on the screen, a bank transfer record, 1247839, Ontario Limited, the 14th of August, 2024. Recipient, Dr. Patricia Holt, psychiatrist. Amount, $55,000. Source account controlled by Ryan Cole. I watched Ryan's face. He had gone the color of old paper. Ryan Cole, I said, has been directing client payments away from Donovan Strategic into a numbered company he controls. I let that settle. 3 client accounts over 8 months. $240,000. I clicked to the next slide. The client list, the amounts, the timestamps. The room erupted in murmurs. Malcolm Strickland stood up slowly. The next slide, a summary of the ASC sanctions from Alberta, Ryan's name highlighted. Ryan rose from his chair. He took 2 steps toward the side exit. 2 men in dark blazers blocked his path. He stopped. I turned back to the audience. Ryan Cole did this because he needed money. He owes $350,000 to a private lender with criminal connections. The repayment deadline is October 15th. He had no legal way to pay it. I clicked again. Anton Grigor's loan documentation. The amount. The date. The compounding interest. So Ryan constructed a plan. He would damage this company systematically, lose clients, misdirect payments, undermine our reputation so that it would appear I was losing my ability to manage it, so that a transfer of control would seem necessary, reasonable, kind even. I paused. He had help. The screen changed. Dr. Patricia Holt's Ontario medical license number, her photograph, her professional address in North York. Dr. Holt prepared a cognitive assessment declaring me unfit. It was signed before she had examined me, before she had met me. The document was dated September 9, 2024. I have never been a patient of Dr. Holt's. I have never been in her office. A woman at table 11 put her hand over her mouth. I have my calendar. I have meeting recordings from every date listed in her assessment. I was present, sharp, and running this company on every single one of those days. Beverly Park, our senior accountant, has verified each one. Beverly stood from table 6. Her voice was steady. I have reviewed the dates. On every occasion cited in Dr. Holt's assessment, Margaret Donovan was present, fully engaged and leading the meeting. She sat down. I said, Dr. Holt has done this before. The screen changed. 3 names. Eleanor Bryce, Howard Pettigrew, Alice Tran. I did not read the details aloud. I let people look. Eleanor Bryce is currently in a long-term care facility in Burlington. She does not need to be there. She is 77 years old, and her assets are gone. Howard Pettigrew died in 2022 Inches, a care facility in Kingston. He died believing his family had taken everything. Because they had. Alice Tran is alive. She fought. Her daughter found the fraud in time. I looked toward the AV table. Victor pressed a key. The screen switched to a live video feed. A woman sat in a living room in Scarborough. 71 years old, silver hair, straight-backed, the particular dignity of someone who has been through fire and come through clean on the other side. My name is Alice Tran, she said. In 2022, Dr. Holt told my son I had moderate cognitive decline. She gave him a document. She told him I would need supervised care within the year. She told him to begin planning the transfer of my property. She leaned forward slightly. Every word of that assessment was a lie. Dr. Holt fabricated the dates. She fabricated the test results. My daughter found the discrepancy in the appointment records. If she hadn't, I would have lost my restaurant, my savings, and my home. She looked directly at the camera. I am here tonight, so the same thing does not happen to Margaret Donovan. The feed ended. The tent, as I say, was a ballroom, and it was absolutely silent. Dr. Holt stood from table 13 and moved toward the exit. The 2 OPP officers stepped forward. She stopped walking. I turned back to the microphone. Tonight, I was supposed to sign documents that my son James prepared. He told me they were a succession plan, a formality for a company reaching maturity. He said it would protect me. I felt James go still. Section 8. 2 of that document states that upon a physician's certification of cognitive impairment, all voting rights, share authority, and fiduciary control over Donovan Strategic Consulting and the Donovan Family Trust transfer immediately and irrevocably to James Donovan as named successor. That transfer was set to execute automatically at 9 p.m. tonight. Diane paused, watching me from table 4, her hand on her folder. The total value of what would have transferred, approximately $11.3 million. The room began to move. Board members stood. Malcolm Strickland's face was dark. I looked at my son. James was not standing. He was very still, his hands flat on the table, and he was staring at me with an expression I had not seen on his face since he was 10 years old and had broken the back window of our car with a hockey puck and had not told me for 3 days. He looked like someone who understood, finally, the full weight of what had been done in his name. His eyes were wet. "Mom," he said. It came out almost soundless. I looked at him for a long moment. "I know," I said. Then I looked at my watch. It was 8:58. "The transfer was scheduled for 9 p.m., I said. 2 minutes from now." I looked at Diane. Diane Goldman stood. "Your Honor," she said, and retired Ontario Superior Court Justice William Tabor, 67, sitting at table 9, as what appeared to be a longtime client, stood in response. "The emergency injunction is now in effect. All accounts associated with Donovan Strategic Consulting, the Donovan Family Trust, and 1247839 Ontario Limited are frozen as of this moment." Victor pressed a key. The screen behind me showed a single line in red. "Transfer blocked. Court Order 20240 NSC 7741. One of the OPP officers approached Ryan Cole. "Ryan Cole, you are under arrest for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, theft over $5,000, and conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse under Section 331 of the Criminal Code of Canada." Ryan said something I could not hear. They handcuffed him and led him out. The second officer walked to Dr. Holt's table. "Dr. Patricia Holt, you are under arrest for fraud, falsification of medical records, and conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse." She did not say anything. She walked out with her head down. The room was very loud, and then, when I raised my hand, very quiet. I said only one more thing before I turned off the microphone. "I built this company with my husband. I have spent 25 years keeping a promise I made at his grave. Tonight that promise is still standing." I looked at the room. "Thank you for being part of it." I set down the microphone. James had not moved. If you're still with me right now, type "still" here in the comments. And tell me honestly, if you were standing at that podium, would you have had the courage to say your son's name out loud? I want to be careful here. Some of what follows is difficult. If this type of story is not for you, I understand completely. I found James outside on the grounds near the old stone wall, his jacket off despite the September cold, sitting on one of the limestone steps with his face in his hands. I sat beside him. The noise from inside was muffled and far away. A security light reflected off the wet grass. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he said, "I knew about the numbered company. I signed the Lakehead redirect. I know. I didn't know about Eleanor Bryce. I didn't know about the other patients." He stopped. "I didn't know he was going to use Holt. Ryan told me the succession plan was standard, that Diane had reviewed it. He said you were overworking. He said you'd been making small errors, forgetting things, and that getting ahead of it legally was the right thing, that you'd thank me later. Did you believe him?" James was quiet. "I wanted to," he said, "and that's the worst part. I knew something wasn't right. I just kept telling myself it was for you." I didn't answer immediately. "You were wrong," I said, "and you knew you were wrong." "Yes." He started to cry then, and I sat beside him and let him. My son, who had his father's hands and his father's stubborn need to be useful, and his father's terrible habit of trusting the wrong people when they told him what he most wanted to hear. By 11, the guests had gone. Diane, Victor, Beverly, and Carol sat with me in the oak-paneled side room off the main hall. The war room, one last time. Diane reported, injunction was solid, both arrests confirmed, bail hearing was Monday. Cole's assets would be reviewed. Alice Tran's civil case against Holt would proceed. The College of Physicians and Surgeons had already received notification. Victor said, the Alberta connection to Cole is opening a separate RCMP financial crimes file. His loan to Grigor is part of a larger pattern they've been tracking. Beverly said she would have a full forensic accounting ready by Wednesday. The diverted client payments could likely be recovered. 2 of the 3 clients, once they understood what had happened, would probably return. Malcolm Strickland had already texted. The board was calling an emergency meeting Monday. James's position was suspended, pending review. He was not under arrest. The prosecutors had determined that his signed involvement was in the redirected payment only, and that the larger fraud had been orchestrated by Cole. He was not charged. Carol poured water for everyone and set a cup in front of me without a word. "What do you need?" she asked. "Sleep," I said, "and maybe a week at the cottage." 6 months passed. Winter came to Toronto the way it always does, not all at once, but in installments. Gray mornings and early dark, and then finally the real cold, the kind that makes the city quiet. I sold Robert's old Muskoka chairs from the garage and bought new ones. A small thing. It felt significant. Ryan Cole was sentenced on February 10th. Wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, theft over $5,000, conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, 7 years in federal prison. Restitution ordered, $240,000 to Donovan Strategic, plus civil liability for client losses. His assets were insufficient. He filed for insolvency. His debt to Anton Grigor remained. The RCMP investigation was ongoing. Dr. Patricia Holt's medical license was revoked by the CPSO in December. On February 20th, she was sentenced to 6 years in provincial prison. 4 convictions: fraud, falsifying records, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. Eleanor Bryce's family launched a civil suit. Howard Pettigrew's daughter launched a second one. Together they were seeking damages of over $4 million. After the press covered the sentencing, 2 more patients came forward. Their cases were being reviewed. James was not charged. The Crown determined he had been manipulated into the succession document through deliberate misrepresentation and had not been aware of the fabricated assessments or Dr. Holt's prior conduct. He resigned from Donovan Strategic in October. He repaid the value of the redirected Lakehead payment from his personal savings. He moved into a smaller apartment in the East End. He started seeing a therapist twice a week, a man named Dr. Andrew Ferris, who specialized in professional ethics and coercive control. James told me this himself in a text message, which was the first honest communication we had had in years. I hired a new VP of operations in November. Her name was Patricia Nguyen, 41, former senior manager at KPMG in Vancouver. Sharp, independent, no connection to anyone in the previous structure. Malcolm Strickland stayed on as board chair. We implemented dual signature authority on all transfers over $10,000. We hired an independent auditor on a quarterly rotation. The Halliburton client came back in January. So did Rideau Agricultural. Revenue projection for 2025, $10.2 million. In August, I had an independent cognitive evaluation conducted by Dr. Michael Chen, a neurologist at UHN. 2 days of testing. His report was 3 pages long and concluded, no evidence of cognitive impairment, memory, executive function, and decision-making in the exceptional range for any age. He shook my hand at the end and said, "You're running at full capacity, Mrs. Donovan." I thanked him and drove home and sat in the kitchen for a while, feeling more tired than victorious. I had quiet dinners with Carol, with Victor, with Beverly. We talked about the city, about the weather, about small things. We had earned the right to small things. In October, Patricia Donovan Alice Tran, in my story, came to visit. We had tea in the sunroom on a gray October afternoon, and she told me about her restaurant, which was doing well again, and I told her about the new directions for the firm. When she left, she hugged me in the doorway and said, "You gave me my voice back." I held her hand for a moment. We had both kept promises. That seemed like enough. The day Ryan was sentenced, I stood alone in my home office, Robert's photograph on the desk, the one from Muskoka, and I said out loud, "I kept it. Everything we built, I kept it." I paused, but I almost lost James. That night, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Then the message, "Mom, it's me. I'm in the East End. I'm working on things. I'm really sorry. Can we talk sometime?" James. I sat on the edge of the bed and held the phone in both hands. Outside the window, the first November snow was coming down soft and steady over the maple in the front yard. Robert had planted that tree the year we bought the house. It was 30 years old now. I typed, "Yes, whenever you're ready." James had moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Leslieville, which he told me was walking distance from a good coffee shop and a used bookstore, and felt more honest somehow than the condo he'd had in Liberty Village. He emailed every few weeks, short messages. How are you? How is Patricia working out? How is the cottage? He didn't call at first, neither did I. I learned later what those months looked like for him. He told me in pieces. Over time, he woke most mornings at 4 a.m. with the specific quality of guilt that arrives in the dark and is not interested in reason. He went to therapy and then went again. He wrote letters he didn't send, to me, to his father, to the clients whose trust he had compromised. He sat with the weight of having loved something, the company, me, Robert's legacy, and having nearly destroyed it from the inside, while telling himself he was helping. Dr. Ferris told him something in October that James read to me much later, from his notebook. He had written it down. You didn't betray her because you didn't love her. You betrayed her because you needed to matter more than she did. That's not a character flaw. That's a wound. The work is figuring out where the wound came from. James told me the wound came from being 26 when his father died and watching me rebuild the company in 2 years and thinking, I will never be that. I will never be enough. And spending the next 11 years trying to prove it otherwise, until someone handed him a way to take the thing instead of earning it. He told me this on a Thursday in December. We were sitting in a Tim Hortons on Queen Street East because he had suggested it and because it was completely ordinary, and that, I think, was exactly what we needed. He was wearing his father's old Carlton sweatshirt. He looked about 19. He said, I know you can't forgive me. I said, I already have. He looked at me for a long time. I said, that doesn't mean I trust you. Those are two different things. He nodded. I know. We sat there for another hour. He told me about his new job contract consulting work, small firms, nothing connected to anything we had built together. He was starting from the bottom again. He said it felt right. He told me about a woman he had met through his therapist's office, not the therapist. A woman in the waiting room who had turned out to be funny and direct and completely unimpressed by his Bay Street history, which he had decided was either a character test or a gift from the universe. I told him about the Muskoka trip I was planning for the summer, the new chairs, the way the water looked in August. He said, can I come sometime, to the cottage? I said, ask me in the spring. He nodded. He didn't push. That, more than anything, told me something had changed. It is now 1 year since the gala. October again. The maples on Hillcrest are the color of fire. I am sitting in the office where Robert used to work, his photograph on the desk. Donovan Strategic is, by any reasonable measure, stronger than it has ever been. The people I work with are people I trust. The systems we put in place are working. This morning James sent me a letter. He does that now. Not emails. Letters, handwritten, 3 or 4 pages, postmarked from the East End. He told me about the woman. Her name is Sarah. She is a high school geography teacher who has never heard of Bay Street and finds this completely reasonable. He said she knows everything that happened. He said she's still here. He wrote, I am trying to become someone Dad would not be ashamed of. I don't know if I'm there, but I'm trying. I know you gave up so much to keep what he built. I understand now what that cost. I understand why I felt invisible in the shadow of it. I am not asking to come back to the firm. I am not asking for forgiveness you haven't already given. I am just asking if we can start over, not from where we were. From somewhere honest. He wrote, I love you, I always did. I was just too busy being afraid of it. I read the letter twice. I set it on Robert's desk next to the photograph. I looked at the maple in the front yard. Then I called James. He picked up on the second ring. I said, I'm going to the cottage in April. Bring Sarah if she'd like to come. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mom. I know, I said. We talked for an hour. About small things. About Robert. About the maple Robert had planted when James was born. When I hung up, I sat for a long time in the quiet house. I had built something 30 years ago with a man I loved and a belief that honest work was worth protecting. I had kept it, not cleanly, not without cost, not without standing at a podium in front of everyone I knew and saying the hardest true thing I have ever said. But I had kept it. And I still have my son. Looking back, I see clearly what I spent years refusing to see. I worked so hard to preserve Robert's legacy that I forgot James needed more than a company to inherit. He needed a mother who sat still long enough for him to know he was enough. I gave him work ethic and high standards, and the example of a woman who never quit, and I forgot to tell him that none of it was more important than him. Ryan Cole did not create that wound. He found it and used it. The wound was already mine to have missed. If you are watching this, and you are the person in the room who holds everything together, the parent, the provider, the one who keeps all the promises, please hear this. Your children do not need your legacy. They need you to look at them long enough to really see them. Ambition without presence doesn't build a family. It builds a distance. And distance, in the wrong hands, becomes a door. I believe in second chances, not because we deserve them, but because sometimes grace arrives in the form of a woman in a tailor shop who heard something through a wall and decided to tell you the truth. I got mine. James is getting his. We are both still learning what it means. Choose presence. Choose honesty. Choose the people in your life before they have to fight to remind you they exist. You cannot get the years back. But sometimes, if you are very fortunate, you get the people. Thank you for walking this entire journey with me. If it meant something to you, if it made you think about trust, or family, or what we build, and for whom I would be grateful if you stayed, there is more to share. And I would love to keep hearing from you.